The most iconic action movie of all time is Die Hard. Die Hard set a new standard when it dropped in 1988. Bruce Willis wasn't an action star yet, he was a sitcom guy. And the studio took a gamble casting him. But he nailed it. John McClane isn't invincible like other action heroes from the time. He's tired, sarcastic, barefoot, and constantly improvising. That human angle made the danger feel real. Alan Rickman's Hans Gruber is easily one of the most calculated, charming villains ever. His calm delivery against McClane's chaos made the conflict way more intense. The script's tight too. Every detail matters. A line said early always comes back with purpose. The Nakatomi Plaza setting? Genius. A single location meant the tension never let up. Critics noticed too. It's sitting at a solid score with thousands of reviews backing it. People tried calling Lethal Weapon or Terminator more iconic, but neither reshaped the genre like Die Hard. It's been copied endlessly with movies like Speed, which is just Die Hard on a bus, and Air Force One, which is just Die Hard on a plane. Studios even pitched movies that way. Its structure practically became a template. That's how you know it's iconic. Horror, The Exorcist. The Exorcist didn't just scare audiences in 1973, it shattered box office records. It became the first horror film nominated for Best Picture, which still barely happens. People literally fainted and threw up in theaters. That's not hype, it's documented. It blended grounded realism with the supernatural so well that even skeptics were rattled. Director William Friedkin treated it like a drama, which made the horror hit harder. And Linda Blair's performance? Terrifying. She was just a kid, but the physicality and intensity were unreal. The sound design alone deserves credit. Those guttural growls and eerie whispers still mess with people. And it wasn't just the shock factor. The script explored faith, guilt, and trauma, making it way more layered than a typical scare fest. Sure, Halloween and Psycho are legends too, but they didn't spark full-blown national debates or exorcism panic. The Exorcist did. It changed how horror was marketed and respected. Studios stopped brushing it off as niche. Even today, horror directors list it as a core influence. It's not just one of the scariest movies ever, it's one of the most influential, period. If you enjoy videos like these, I'm gonna start posting a lot here. I would really appreciate if you would subscribe. Thanks. Anyways, romance Casablanca. Casablanca came out in 1942 and somehow still feels timeless. It's not just about love, it's about sacrifice, duty, and timing. Humphrey Bogart as Rick wasn't your typical romantic lead, but he made cynicism look noble. Ingrid Bergman's Ilsa was complex, emotional, and stuck in an impossible choice. Their chemistry wasn't loud, it simmered. Every line in that script matters. No wasted words, no filler. The dialogue's been quoted for decades, and not just "here's looking at you, kid." The film captured the tension of World War II without turning into propaganda. It gave real weight to what people had to give up for something bigger than themselves. Casablanca went with heartbreak and somehow made it satisfying. Critics still rank it near the top across every genre. Titanic, The Notebook, and Roman Holiday all had their moments, but none balance personal love and global stakes like this. Even the background characters feel lived in. Laszlo isn't a throwaway obstacle, he's a full-on war hero. The film's impact hit fast and never faded. It's been preserved, restored, quoted, and studied. Romantic films don't usually age this well, but Casablanca, it just refuses to fade. Science fiction, Star Wars. A New Hope. When Star Wars dropped in 1977, it didn't just redefine sci-fi, it blew the whole thing wide open. Before that, the genre was mostly slow, cerebral, and sometimes pretty bleak. Then George Lucas showed up with space battles, aliens, robots, and laser swords, and somehow made it all feel grounded. It used real sets, models, and revolutionary visual effects that still hold up. The world building? Off the charts. Every detail in the background hinted at a bigger galaxy, which fans absolutely ate up. But the characters are what locked it in. Luke's arc, Han's swagger, Leia's strength, they weren't just archetypes, they had actual development. And Darth Vader? That voice alone became legendary. The score by John Williams added weight to every scene. Star Wars didn't just become the highest grossing film of its time, it launched an empire. Blade Runner and 2001 are brilliant, but they didn't make kids play with action figures for decades. Star Wars made science fiction cool, accessible, and emotional. It wasn't just about the tech, it was about hope. It changed how movies were made and sold. Every science fiction movie after A New Hope lived in its shadow. That's why it's the most iconic sci-fi movie of all time. Thriller, The Silence of the Lambs. The Silence of the Lambs came out in 1991 and didn't just shake up the thriller genre, it devoured it. Jonathan Demme directed it like a psychological chess match where the scariest scenes happen in locked rooms filled with quiet tension. Jodie Foster's Clarice Starling wasn't just a rookie FBI agent, she was smart, vulnerable, and constantly underestimated. And Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter. He only needed 16 minutes to become one of the most terrifying characters in film history, calm, intelligent, polite, and utterly monstrous. The film doesn't rely on gore. It gets under your skin through power dynamics, silence, and what's not being said. The interviews between Clarice and Lecter are electric, filled with subtext and dread. Buffalo Bill, the actual killer being hunted, adds another chilling layer. The storytelling is precise, the pace never slips, and the suspense builds like a pressure cooker. Other thrillers like Seven and Zodiac are masterful, but The Silence of the Lambs won all 5 major Oscars. No other thriller's done that. It made horror cerebral and prestige all at once. That's why it's still the benchmark. Unnerving, brilliant, and impossible to forget. It doesn't blink, and neither do you. Comedy, Superbad. Superbad dropped in 2007 and instantly nailed what teen comedies had been missing: awkward honesty. It didn't rely on slick dialogue or over-the-top gags. It leaned all the way into embarrassing moments, cringy friendships, and bad decisions. Jonah Hill and Michael Cera had ridiculous chemistry, like they were actually friends who'd been oversharing for years. The script, written by Seth Rogen and Evan Goldberg when they were teens, felt painfully real. That's the secret. There's zero polish. Every scene feels like it could have happened to you or someone you knew. And then there's Mick Lovin. One fake ID, one ridiculous name, and he stole the entire movie. The film balanced raunch with heart, and that's what most imitators missed. It's chaotic, but never mean. The cops were useless, the party was a disaster, and every plan fell apart. Yet somehow, it all worked. Some point to classics like Animal House or Ferris Bueller, but those never captured modern adolescence like Superbad did. It tapped into insecurity, desperation, and that weird fear of growing apart. Even now, it still holds up. Quotes are everywhere, memes never stopped, and people still shout Mick Lovin like it's a cultural landmark. That's because in comedy, it is. Fantasy, The Return of the King. The Return of the King hit theaters in 2003 and didn't just close a trilogy, it steamrolled the entire fantasy genre. It won 11 Academy Awards, tying the all-time record, and every single one was earned. Peter Jackson somehow pulled off the impossible. He adapted the most complex, lore-heavy saga into something emotionally massive and visually overwhelming. The battles, giant in scale but still focused on characters. The special effects, way ahead of their time. And the storytelling never got lost in spectacle. Every major character arc lands, Aragorn steps into his destiny, Sam becomes the real hero, and Frodo's journey ends not with glory, but with scars. The emotion hits hard, and Howard Shore's score practically carried scenes on its own. Some say Harry Potter or Pan's Labyrinth belong in the conversation, but they didn't redefine what fantasy on film could look like. The Return of the King made people take the genre seriously. No more goofy props or second-rate treatment. This was epic, tragic, triumphant, and completely grounded in real stakes. It wrapped up a 10-hour saga with actual payoff, which almost never happens. That's why it's the crown jewel of fantasy films. Western, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Released in 1966, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly wasn't just a Western, it detonated the idea of what a Western could be. Sergio Leone's direction threw out the clean-cut hero trope and replaced it with gritty, silent tension, and morally bankrupt gunslingers. Clint Eastwood's man with no name barely speaks, but every squint and pause says more than a page of dialogue. Ennio Morricone's score is one for the ages. That haunting whistle, the electric guitar, it turns silence into suspense. The cinematography is legendary too. Extreme close-ups and wide-open landscapes built a style that directors still copy. The plot, 3 men chasing buried gold during the Civil War, all double-crossing and outwitting each other. It's not just cool, it's smart. Leone blurred the lines between good and evil and somehow made all 3 leads compelling in completely different ways. Other classics like Shane or Stagecoach set the table, but this one broke it, flipped it, and built a new one out of dynamite and cigarette smoke. It's been parodied, studied, and remixed for decades. If one Western had to wear the crown, it'd be this one. Smirking through the smoke, gun drawn. Drama, The Godfather. The Godfather came out in 1972 and didn't just redefine drama, it became the blueprint for serious character-driven storytelling. Francis Ford Coppola crafted every scene with obsessive precision. The pacing's slow, but never boring. Every pause, every look, every whisper builds pressure. Marlon Brando as Vito Corleone delivered a performance that's still studied in acting classes. Al Pacino's transformation from reluctant outsider to cold, calculated boss is one of the greatest arcs in film. The cinematography, dark, moody, and rich with shadow, it made crime look operatic. And the score by Nino Rota, instantly recognizable, quietly devastating. The Godfather didn't rely on action action or big twists, it focused on loyalty, legacy, and the brutal cost of power. The dialogue never wastes a word. Every line serves the characters or pushes the family deeper into chaos. Other contenders like Schindler's List or Citizen Kane come close, but The Godfather hits every mark. Writing, acting, direction, influence. It's not just a story about the mafia, it's a story about family, survival, and identity wrapped in tragedy. It made drama dangerous and elegant at the same time. That's why it's still the gold standard. Nothing's come close to knocking it off the throne. Musical, Singing in the Rain. Singing in the Rain landed in 1952 and didn't just charm audiences, it defined what a movie musical could be. It mixed jaw-dropping choreography with actual storytelling, which wasn't the norm at the time. Gene Kelly wasn't just dancing, he was doing it soaked in one take with a fever. The title number alone became a cinematic landmark, but the rest of the film pulls its weight too. Make 'em Laugh, Good Morning, Moses Supposes, every song's unforgettable, and every sequence explodes with energy. Debbie Reynolds held her own despite brutal rehearsal schedules and zero dance background, and Donald O'Connor basically threw his spine away to make people laugh. The plot was smart too. It tackled the awkward transition from silent films to talkies, all while being meta, funny, and packed with heart. Other musicals like West Side Story and The Sound of Music are legends, but Singin' in the Rain is pure movie magic. It's got satire, spectacle, and insane talent across the board. The colors pop, the pacing flies, and somehow it still feels fresh over 70 years later. It didn't just entertain, it made musicals feel timeless and set a bar that still hasn't been topped. Adventure, Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. Raiders of the Lost Ark burst onto screens in 1981 and basically redefined the adventure genre overnight. Steven Spielberg directed it like a roller coaster, but with actual stakes and zero dead weight. From the first scene, Indiana Jones wasn't a superhero. He got bruised, messed up, and nearly crushed by giant boulders. That vulnerability made the danger feel real. Harrison Ford gave him charm and grit without trying too hard. The pacing's relentless. Every scene moves the plot, and each set piece somehow tops the last. That's not luck. It's razor-sharp filmmaking. The story blends archaeology, myth, and Nazi punching into a globe-trotting race that never lets up. John Williams' score? Basically adventure in musical form. Some say The African Queen or Lawrence of Arabia laid the groundwork, and sure, those mattered. But Raiders turned the genre into pure cinematic electricity. It mixed old-school serials with blockbuster precision and created a character who could fail, fight, and look terrified, all while keeping the hat on. The practical effects still hold up, and the ending didn't play it safe either. That face-melting finale, still wild. Raiders didn't just raise the bar, it is the bar for movie adventure. Crime, Goodfellas. Goodfellas dropped in 1990 and blew the lid off the crime genre. Martin Scorsese didn't romanticize the mob. He made it loud, fast, and brutally honest. From the opening line, it's clear this isn't about loyalty or honor, it's about power, money, and ego. Ray Liotta's Henry Hill isn't some genius mastermind. He's just caught in the thrill. Robert De Niro and Joe Pesci turn in performances that practically vibrate with tension. Pesci turns volatility into an art form. You never know when he'll laugh or snap. The pacing's electric, freeze frames, voiceover, needle drops, it all moves like a high. The editing makes you feel the rush, then the crash. And that soundtrack, every song punches. The film doesn't waste time explaining the system, it shows how it pulls people in and chews them up. It's based on real events too, which makes every betrayal land harder. Some point to Heat or Scarface, but Goodfellas is street-level chaos. It shows the day-to-day rot, not just the big meetings and thrones. It made the crime film feel immediate, messy, and personal. You're not just watching gangsters, you're inside the spiral. That's why it's still the kingpin of the genre. Superhero, The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight hit theaters in 2008 and instantly shattered the idea that superhero movies had to be flashy and simple. Christopher Nolan built it like a crime thriller first, comic book second. It didn't just have big action, it had big questions about morality, chaos, and sacrifice. Christian Bale's Batman was darker, more conflicted, and grounded in real pain. But let's be honest, Heath Ledger's Joker is what made it iconic. That performance wasn't cartoonish, it was raw, unpredictable, and terrifying. Every line he delivered felt like it might explode. And it wasn't just the acting. The practical effects, the cityscapes, the tension in scenes like the ferry dilemma, they all hit with weight. Hans Zimmer's score wasn't just music, it was pressure. Other superhero films like Spider-Man 2 or Logan deserve credit, but The Dark Knight made critics take the genre seriously. It got nominated for multiple major awards, and Ledger's win still stands as a turning point. This wasn't just capes and gadgets, it was a real film with depth and teeth. It proved superhero stories could carry the same emotional and thematic power as any drama. That's why it changed the game completely. Coming of age. Stand By Me. Stand By Me came out in 1986 and captured what growing up really feels like: messy, confusing, and unforgettable. Based on a Stephen King novella, it ditched the usual high school cliches for something way more honest. Four boys set out to find a dead body, but what they really find is everything they didn't know about themselves. The dialogue's sharp, but natural. No one talks like a movie character, they talk like actual kids. Will Wheaton, River Phoenix, Corey Feldman, and Jerry O'Connell had chemistry that felt lived in, like they'd been friends for years. River Phoenix especially brought a quiet depth that still hits hard. The film never overplays its hand. It deals with trauma, family, identity, and loss without ever getting preachy. The narration adds a layer of reflection that gives every moment more weight. Some point to The Breakfast Club or Boyhood, but those don't hit the emotional balance quite like this. Rob Reiner directed it with restraint, letting the characters and setting do the work. You don't just watch them grow up, you feel it. It's not about one big moment, it's about all the little ones that shape who you are. That's why it's still unmatched. Disaster, The Day After Tomorrow. The Day After Tomorrow turned climate catastrophe into a blockbuster spectacle. Roland Emmerich didn't do subtle, he went straight for global destruction, and the visuals backed it up. Giant tidal waves swallowing New York, superstorms freezing entire cities, tornadoes shredding Los Angeles. It went big from the start. The science? Definitely dramatic, but the core idea of climate tipping points was rooted in real concerns, even if the timeline got Hollywood-level ridiculous. Dennis Quaid played the climatologist racing to warn the world, while Jake Gyllenhaal's character fought to survive in a frozen Manhattan library. The pacing's sharp, jumping between collapsing governments and stranded survivors without ever losing momentum. The effects still hold up, especially that massive wave sequence in the instant freeze storm. Earlier, disaster films like Twister or Dante's Peak stayed regional, but this one was global. It wasn't just one disaster, it was all of them, chained together. While critics were split, audiences made it a hit, and it sparked real conversations about climate risks. It's not as grounded as Titanic, but it turned a real-world fear into giant popcorn movie chaos. That's why it stands out. The Day After Tomorrow is pure disaster spectacle done huge. War, Saving Private Ryan. Saving Private Ryan exploded into theaters in 1998 and instantly reset the bar for war films. Steven Spielberg opened with the D-Day landing at Omaha Beach, and that 20-minute sequence hit like a sledgehammer. Chaotic, brutal, and horrifyingly real. The camera never flinched. Bullets tore through water, soldiers screamed for medics, and the beach turned into pure carnage. It wasn't stylized. It was devastating. Tom Hanks led the cast as Captain Miller, bringing quiet exhaustion and focus to a mission that felt doomed from the start. The squad wasn't made of action heroes. They were scared, flawed, and human. That made every death land harder. The sound design was relentless. Gunfire, explosions, silence, each one timed like a gut punch. Other war films like Platoon or Apocalypse Now focused on madness, but Saving Private Ryan focused on sacrifice. The mission to find one soldier isn't just about orders, it's about holding on to some kind of meaning amid all the chaos. Spielberg didn't glamorize war, he stripped it down. The film won technical awards, but it's the emotional weight that stuck. No easy victories, no clean endings, just loss, duty, and the cost of doing what's right. Biopic Raging Bull. Raging Bull came out in 1980 and didn't just tell a life story, it tore one apart. Martin Scorsese shot it in stark black and white, stripping away glamour and laying Jake LaMotta bare. Robert De Niro didn't just play LaMotta, he became him. He trained like a boxer, fought real matches, then gained over 60 pounds to portray the broken, bloated version of the man. The transformation's still one of the most extreme in film history. The boxing scenes weren't about sports, they were expressionistic, violent, and personal. Blood hit the camera, sweat flew in slow motion, and the sound design made every punch sound like it was breaking bone. But the real damage happened outside the ring. LaMotta's paranoia, jealousy, and self-destruction unravel everything around him. His marriage, his career, his sense of self, it all gets scorched. Other biopics like Ray or Walk the Line show rise and fall, but Raging Bull stays in the fall. It doesn't ask for sympathy, it doesn't soften the edges, it just stares at the wreckage and refuses to look away. That's why it's not just one of the greatest biopics, it's one of the rawest, most honest character studies ever filmed. Sports Rocky. Rocky hit in 1976 and didn't just win Best Picture, it punched its way into movie history. Sylvester Stallone wrote the script in 3 days, refused to sell it unless he starred, and turned a no-name underdog story into a cultural icon. It wasn't about winning the fight, it was about getting the shot. Rocky Balboa wasn't flashy, he was broke, awkward, and bruised from life before he ever stepped in the ring. The training montage? Legendary. That run up the Philadelphia steps became a symbol of grit worldwide, but the film isn't all gloves and sweat. It's about pride, self-worth, and proving you matter. Stallone and Talia Shire's awkward love story grounds the whole thing. Carl Weathers as Apollo Creed. A perfect mix of charisma and ego. And the final fight, messy, brutal, real, doesn't end with a fairy tale win. Rocky goes the distance, and that's the victory. Other sports films like Hoosiers or The Natural are classics, but Rocky's scrappy spirit hit harder. It's not just a boxing movie, it's a story for anyone who's ever been counted out. It showed heartbeats flash every time, that's why Rocky still stands. Gloves up, the most iconic sports movie of all time. Monster movie Jaws. Jaws hit theaters in 1975 and turned a mechanical shark into the stuff of legend. Steven Spielberg didn't have fancy effects or endless budget, he had suspense, timing, and John Williams' two-note score that practically rewired people's fear of the ocean. The monster barely shows up for most of the film, and that's what made it terrifying. You don't see the shark, you feel it. Every ripple, every fin, every silent moment on the water built tension like a slow heartbeat. Roy Scheider, Richard Dreyfuss, and Robert Shaw weren't action heroes. They were flawed, human, and totally unprepared. That made the danger feel personal. The pacing's tight, the editing razor sharp, and the second half becomes a stripped-down survival story. Other monster films like King Kong and Godzilla came first, sure, but Jaws changed everything. It turned the summer blockbuster into a cultural event and made monsters scary in a way that felt real. It didn't hide behind fantasy, it floated right under your feet. The box office exploded, the genre shifted, and beach attendance plummeted. That's power. Jaws isn't just a monster movie, it is the most iconic monster movie, and it still has teeth. Big, terrifying, unforgettable teeth. Slasher, Scream. Scream sliced into theaters in 1996 and didn't just revive the slasher genre, it dissected it while still being one of the best entries in it. Wes Craven knew the formula because he helped invent it, and then he flipped it. The opening scene with Drew Barrymore, a full-on shockwave. It killed off the biggest name early and made it clear no one was safe. But what really set Scream apart was the script. Kevin Williamson's writing was sharp, self-aware, and packed with horror references without turning into parody. The characters knew the rules of horror movies and still got picked off. That meta angle gave it an edge no other slasher had pulled off. Neve Campbell's Sidney Prescott wasn't just a final girl. She was smart, strong, and actually developed across the series. Ghostface wasn't a supernatural monster, he was a person, behind a mask changing every time. That made him unpredictable. Other slashers like Halloween and Friday the 13th built the genre, but Scream brought it back to life when it was on life support. It made a horror cool again, made people care, and made studios pay attention. That's why it didn't just scream, it echoed loudly, and it still does. Romantic comedy When Harry Met Sally. When Harry Met Sally hit in 1989, it immediately rewrote the rules for romantic comedies. Rob Reiner directed it with just the right balance of wit and warmth. But it was Nora Ephron's script that made it iconic. Every line feels sharp, honest, and perfectly timed. Billy Crystal and Meg Ryan had chemistry that didn't rely on cliche, they felt real. Like two people actually fumbling through love and friendship. The story spans over a decade, showing how messy timing can be without ever losing momentum. The conversations carry the movie, and they're packed with opinions people still argue about. That diner scene? Yeah, everyone knows it, but the movie doesn't lean on one moment. It builds its legacy through constant layered dialogue. Other rom-coms like Pretty Woman or Sleepless in Seattle had charm, but When Harry Met Sally brought introspection without losing laughs. It asked whether men and women could be friends, and then answered it with emotional honesty instead of tropes. The supporting characters feel lived in, the structure never drags, and the payoff hits without feeling forced. It didn't just deliver romance, it delivered truth with jokes. That's why it still leads the genre, no contest. If you enjoy videos like these, I'm gonna start posting a lot here. I would really appreciate if you would subscribe. Thanks, and see you next time.